Today's movie is Monterey Pop, filmed at the Hippie Music Festival in Monterey, California, in June 16th to 18th, 1967. Monterey Pop is a revolution in film. It's the first rock festival documentary, the very first. It featured multiple handheld cameras simultaneously filming one-time performances that would never be repeated. The Beatles film we saw, Hard Day's Night, was shot in documentary style, yes, but it was fiction, scripted, and though supposedly covering only 2 days in the Beatles' lives, was actually filmed over a period of 6 weeks. That's not true with Monterey Pop. It's really a documentary. But Don Pennebaker's film is also filming a revolution, a cultural revolution. The movie and the music expresses it. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato said, quote, when the mode of music changes, the walls of the city shake. That is the theme of today's lecture. In 67, Don Pennebaker already was a famous documentary filmmaker. In his documentary Primary about John Kennedy versus Hubert Humphrey in 1960, he pioneered the first use of handheld cameras. He just made a rock documentary of Bob Dylan on tour in Britain, Don't Look Back, it's a famous film. But Don't Look Back was again different from Monterey Pop. Don't Look Back was filmed over several weeks in black and white using a single cameraman, namely Pennebaker, and with access to Bob Dylan's life between concerts. By contrast, Monterey Pop was shot in color in just 3 days using 6 camera people simultaneously, and the focus is almost totally on the music being performed. There could be no mistakes because nothing could be repeated. The musical performances are the message. What the music is, what it sounds like, who is playing it, what they look like, who the audience is, what they look like, how they react to the music. This was the cultural revolution. Monterey Pop shows what happened when ideas previously limited to a few avant-garde enclaves collided with the giant baby boomer generation. The result was a contradiction in terms, mass bohemianism. We need to say that Pennebaker, as editor, even though he's got all this raw footage, was in control as editor of what we see. Although everything is real and happened at the moment, Pennebaker's slant is clearly very positive towards the counterculture. Pennebaker admitted this, saying he was enchanted by the entire San Francisco hippie scene, its aura of authentic freedom. And perhaps, too, he focuses too much attention on pretty white hippie girls. But that doesn't mean the film is getting it wrong. But why would Plato say that when the mode of music changes, the walls of the city shake? In 1967, Ralph Gleason, the music critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, quoted and stressed Plato's insight. It's about music's rivalry with the state. Music and art was at war with the state here in the Bay Area in the late 60s. Plato feared that innovation in music would undermine social stability. This was because, quote, music can change our characters. Well, psychedelic music, as the greatest expression of hippie counterculture, bears out Plato's connection between the changes in music and social stability. Antonio Gramsci, the great modern social theorist, agreed with Plato. Quote, those who would change society must change people's consciousness first. And art was central to doing it. Gramsci argued that culture is not simply the superstructure built on an economic base, that's traditional Marxism, but instead culture has independent power. His motto was, capture the culture, everything else will follow. In our film, we can see this process occurring. So after a general introduction like this, I usually discuss a film's plot. But Monterey Pop doesn't really have a plot. It's simply a documentary of the music performances. So instead, I thought to give some comments on some of the performances. But then I'm going to discuss the social background, that is, the rise of the counterculture, and then the making of the film, and then its impact. So first, the performances. Uh, I'm only selecting a few, the ones I liked. First, Jefferson Airplane. They defined the San Francisco hippie sound. They were the first local San Francisco band to triumph nationally with the hippie anthem Somebody to Love and then White Rabbit, that is Go Ask Alice, a hymn to LSD. They had two great vocalists, the erotically menacing Grace Slick and melancholy Marty Ballin. At Monterey, they were as good as their reputation. They sometimes played with their backs to the audience, facing the light show that loomed over their heads, one of those bubble spectacles. Well, they were stoned themselves when they were playing. Art Garfunkel said it didn't matter if they didn't face the audience. It was their music that held the audience transfixed. Music, that's our theme. At Monterey, the airplane played their famous swooping melodies. In the film, the song is The Slow and Beautiful Today. One of the other songs they played was Young Girl Sunday Blues. It's not in the film. Marty Ballin wrote that song, Young Girl Sunday Blues, for the teenagers Sally and Joni Edelstein. Sally says their relationship with the band was innocent because they were young. The band used to come over for milk and cookies. Joni Edelstein was a special friend of Janis Joplin's. Joni was killed in Jerusalem when the bus she was riding on was blown up by a Hamas terrorist in 1995. Otis Redding. He gave a terrific performance, as we see with Try a Little Tenderness in the film. Otis Redding was backed by Booker T and the MGs, a famous band in themselves. Booker T said about Monterey, quote, "This was a different time on planet Earth. The atmosphere at Monterey was unlike any I had ever experienced. I don't remember seeing any police. I remember a free feeling I'd never known could exist in America. I was very moved. It was amazing." And then there's Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company. Uh, Janis Joplin's blues singing was one of the two biggest stories at Monterey. At this point, she was just a Texas girl with a local band. She was shaking before she went on. She was so nervous. And it took the great soul singer Lou Rawls to calm her down, another hugely talented Black star who believed in the counterculture as a way out of racism. But then when she went on and she stomped her foot, bang, she was the best blues singer since Ray Charles. The band concluded with an 11-minute version of Big Mama Thornton's Ball and Chain. It's a centerpiece of our documentary. Janis's feet stomping, her hair flying, she's screaming, "Can a white girl sing the blues?" Janis's answer was yes. She was so great that she and her band were invited back a second time the next day to do a second set, the only band that was. Now, sitting in the VIP section, this is something I'm going to be talking about more. There was a VIP section of the audience, the first two rows in front of the stage. It was reserved for record company representatives. One of the people there was Albert Grossman, the manager of Bob Dylan. Grossman became Big Brother's agent and got them a lucrative record contract. This is an example of how performances at Monterey were expressions of the counterculture for sure, but simultaneously they were auditions for big money. And finally, the Jimi Hendrix experience. This was Jimi Hendrix's first American appearance at Monterey. His spectacular performance was another big story at Monterey, the second big story, maybe the first big story. Jimi Hendrix, like Booker T and Lou Rawls, saw the counterculture as a possible solution to American racism. That's how powerful the counterculture vision was. Jimi Hendrix dressed like a hippie. One of the greatest of all guitar players, Hendrix could make his electric guitar thunder or scream. He could be melodic and gentle, but more often dissonant and ultra loud. At Monterey, he played the guitar with his teeth, sometimes while holding it between his legs, creating an obscene image. At the end of his final song, Wild Thing, he smashed his electric guitar to bits and squirted lighter fluid on it and set it on fire. And so Hendrix emerged from Monterey as the great guitar god. Hendrix's performance was totally physical, shocking even to Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane. And yet, the last time we see Hendrix in the film, he's sitting dazed and enchanted with the rest of the audience as the great Ravi Shankar plays spiritual Indian music on sitar and tambla. Okay, so those are some of the performances at Monterey. So now to the countercultural background, what the film shows. That is, why San Francisco and why Haight-Ashbury? Bohemianism in America went back as far as Emerson and Walden Pond. It reemerged in the 50s in beatnik literature and in small folk and jazz scenes. In San Francisco, this meant the great beat poets of North Beach. But these were always tiny subcultures, dwarfed in America by network TV, by pop radio, by sports, business, and by mainstream religion. This is not what happened in the 60s. San Francisco itself didn't look like a promising place for a mass youth rock music revolution. It was a tough working class port town. By the early 1960s, the small group of beat poets had faded away, replaced by strip joints in North Beach. And the Republican National Convention that nominated Barry Goldwater for president was staged here in San Francisco. And that was in 1964 at the Cow Palace. And the Cow Palace is just 10 miles from where the Haight-Ashbury was already stirring. Quite a juxtaposition. The Haight-Ashbury neighborhood became the center of a mass youth cultural revolution. I want to stress this. The Beats are wonderful, but they're a tiny group. What happened 10 years later was a mass cultural revolution. Haight-Ashbury lay at the far west end of the city, running 7 blocks east-west, that's the Panhandle, people might know, into Golden Gate Park. There had been a tiny bohemian community there from 1963 or so, but it was negative publicity that helped create the hate we know. In 1965, the local Hearst newspaper began calling Haight-Ashbury the new beatnik haven. The reason was that Hearst interests wanted a monstrous concrete freeway built right through the Panhandle. Attacking the tiny bohemian community as a bunch of communists was a way to get public support for the Panhandle Freeway. The Panhandle Freeway plan was part of the 1960s mania for freeway building inside cities that damaged so many neighborhoods. But the negative publicity that the Hearst newspaper set off had the contrary effect of attracting a critical mass of creative people into the Haight. Hell, that looks like a good place to live. Low rents made it especially attractive. The low rents were because the owners of the lovely but dilapidated Victorian houses, who were mostly black people, feared that they would soon be demolished by the freeway. That's why rents were low. How different American cultural history might have been had that freeway been built. Local opposition was led by 2 political newcomers, Dianne Feinstein and Willie Brown. The freeway project was only abandoned by the City Council in March 1966. It was only then that the Haight came into its own. A music colony developed there with the Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead living next to each other in old Victorian houses. Bohemian students from San Francisco State were also attracted. You know, in popular memory, SF State is overshadowed by Berkeley. But in the late 60s, SF State was a real center of political and cultural radicalism. The first student-run experimental college was founded there in 1965. I know the founder. The Black Panthers were founded there. I know some of them too. The longest student strike in US history occurred there. The first ethnic studies college was founded there. And Haight-Ashbury was connected to SF State in this period by a trolley. Really close connection. Of course, the trolley's gone now. By summer 66, money was flowing into the Haight from the sale of marijuana. It was weed that funded the head shops, the health food stores, the clothing stores, the diggers handing out free food, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. As Paul Kantner of the Jefferson Airplane wrote, the music, the clothes, the long hair, the bookstore, the poets, the Eastern religion, the new ecology concerns, suddenly everything was there. Suddenly, here we were. The Haight now expressed a countercultural desire for a new transcendent order. Rain Jacopetti of the Open Theater, also called the Nude Theater, declared, believe it and it will exist. Believe it and it will exist. It was a positive, happy vision of individual liberation. Dropout sometimes did mean leaving school or meaningless job, but at heart, it meant leaving pre-programmed ideas behind and thinking for yourself, finding your own truth. When I taught this course last year at Cal, people said it was the kind of positive alternative vision that seemed lacking in the bitter activists of today. On May 13, 1967, the Council for a Summer of Love, a coalition of Haight countercultural groups, proclaimed, quote, this summer, the youth of the world are making a holy pilgrimage to our city to celebrate a new spiritual dawn. Optimism ruled. Optimism. But why music? Literature, not music, had been the most important expression of beat culture in the 50s. But in the 60s, San Francisco's cultural revolution was led by music. It was rock and roll, thunderous, psychedelic, tuneful, and often ecstatic. Of course, like last week, it's difficult, even ridiculous, for me to lecture on music. You have to hear it, you have to listen to it, you have to feel it to appreciate it. I have to say, I once heard Jefferson Airplane do a song, and I've never been able to get a record where it sounded like what they sounded like. It was just thunder. Okay, nevertheless, here it goes. About music. San Francisco rock. It developed along a unique path. The Bay Area had a relatively small black population, and rhythm and blues contributed only a little to the San Francisco sound, the exception, of course, being Janis. Local musicians developed a unique style, a style where very powerful beatnik lyrics rode above a sweet, swooping melodic line that was backed by thunderous thumping amplifiers. And of course, a massive influence on this sweet music was the psychedelic drug LSD, the mind expander, which is why a central characteristic of San Francisco psychedelic music was optimism. As in The Birds Twangling Mr. Tambourine Man, Roger McGuinn, the lead guitarist, was influenced by John Lennon's first crashing 12-string guitar chord in A Hard Day's Night, or the Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit, Go Ask Alice. Grateful Dead guitarist Bob Weir described the music as fluid and buoyant. LSD in this period was legal in California, and from November 1965, Ken Kesey, the novelist, popularized its use in the Bay Area through what he called acid tests. The acid tests, open to all, were staged with huge tubs of LSD-laced Kool-Aid, with rock bands playing music, and with huge fluid light shows. This all began in autumn of '65. The impact on those who attended and drank the Kool-Aid was large. The first ever acid test, folks, was held in Santa Cruz in November 1965. Up in San Francisco the next month, Bill Graham held the first ever Fillmore Auditorium psychedelic dance party. And this first dance concert came with the endorsement of Bob Dylan. He loved the flyer for the concert, which said, an appeal for continued freedom in the arts. The Grateful Dead made its debut publicly at this concert. The famous rock bands were, of course, enthusiastic participants in these dance concerts, and in the weed and LSD that fueled them. So at this point, LSD was not the legal danger, marijuana was. Ken Kesey had to flee to Mexico because of two busts for weed in 2 weeks in early '66. Dino Valente, the composer of the great hippie anthem Get Together, had to sell his rights to the song for just a few $100 in order to make bail for his marijuana bust. Most of the bands that became famous, the Grateful Dead, Big Brother, Quicksilver Messenger Service, still had no recording contracts. This is because San Francisco was geographically isolated at the far end of the country, and the music business was situated mostly in New York. I know we all think of the Bay Area as the center of the world, but it's really at the far end of the United States. But by late '65, the Beatles themselves were following the psychedelic path. I was talking to Mark about technology before we began, and I want to emphasize that it was new technology that gained the San Francisco band's national exposure. First, the small transistor radio. It made rock and roll instantly available to young people anywhere in the country. You can see it actually in the transistor radio that the Beatles are playing in the scene with the old businessman who dislikes them. That's the impact of the transistor radio. The transistor radio led to the decline of the jukebox in restaurants and bars, which until then had been the only alternative to playing vinyl records at home. I remember there were still jukeboxes in restaurants near Berkeley, near the university, and that was in 1968. The second innovation was the FM underground radio station. Previously, FM had been devoted to classical music or jazz or public service announcements. In April 1967, KMPX in San Francisco became the first station to offer psychedelic rock long cuts taken from vinyl albums that were still obscure, or even playing entire albums all at once for an hour, along with dollops of radical politics mixed in. And, of course, requests for ride to Mendocino. KMPX was also the only radio station in the city to employ female sound technicians. But now thousands of young people all over the Bay Area could use their radios to hear the new music and its message. And then there were those famous dance concerts. These were inherently political, linked to anti-war and Black liberation. The first dance concert held in the city in late '65 was a benefit to raise money for the politically radical San Francisco Mime Troupe, one of whose founders I know. But these concerts are different. You know, if you think about the Hard Day's Night concert at the end, people are sitting in seats listening. These concerts were not like that. These were also complete sensory experiences, integrating thunderous music with ecstatic dancing out on the floor, psychedelic poster art, day-glow body planing, fantastic light shows of flowing liquid paint, flashing strobe lights, disorienting sound effects, and of course, the odor of weed. Above all, it was participatory. The dancing audience was as much the center of attention as the players. Marijuana, LSD, and swooping fluid music, and the fabulous light shows, and the audience's mass dancers, the idea was to produce sensory overload, an overpowering simultaneity that breaks down the confines of usual rational thought, ecstasy. Again, of course, a central driving force in producing sensory ecstasy and sensory overload was the still legal and freely available LSD. Crucially, what began as wild, one at a time watershed dance events in the autumn of '65, by spring '66 had become regular events. Psychedelic dance concerts suddenly were being held every weekend, an expansion of what had just emerged. The multimedia dances were held at Bill Graham's Fillmore Auditorium and Chet Helms's Avalon Ballroom, both of them near the Haight. Minimum ticket prices, ever larger crowds, and the mystical turn of mind that always accompanied psychedelics, these regular dance concerts were like religious rituals. In fact, some historians think of what happened in the late 60s as a religious awakening. How fast this all happened, the creation of a whole way of life centered on regular psychedelic music events. And in this way, the music, the San Francisco sound, became the unacknowledged legislator of the world, the anti government, Plato's insight. And it's on stage in Monterey Pop. One culmination of the revolution was the human being in Golden Gate Park in January 1967. The idea was to bring together the Berkeley radicals and the Haight-Ashbury hippies into a united front. The event was pushed by the hippie newspaper The Oracle in the city and by the Berkeley Barb across the bay. The editor of The Oracle wrote in hope, a union of love and activism combined, previously separated by categorical dogma and label mongering. This will occur ecstatically when Berkeley political activists and the San Francisco spiritual generation meet in a gathering of the tribes. The date for the human being was chosen, as you might imagine, being hippies, by an astrologer to the intense discomfort of the Berkeley politicos. Say what? Early in the morning before the being, the poet Allen Ginsberg performed a solemn Hindu ritual, walking in a circle around the meadow and intoning Hindu chants to turn it into a mela, a site of religious pilgrimage. Of course, entrance was free. What else? In the event, the Berkeley politicos were overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of hippies who showed up, 25,000 people, more or less, and also by a defective sound system that failed to carry their speeches out to the mass of the people. The mass of the people were interested in hearing the great rock bands, Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, Big Brother. The united political front did not occur. It would have to wait for 2 years, and then there would be a real explosion. But nevertheless, everyone had a great time, which of course is typical. Probably the most important thing about the Bean, though, was its huge size and its countercultural nature for the first time attracted national attention. Haight-Ashbury had previously been merely an interesting local San Francisco story, but Newsweek put it in its February 6, 1967 issue and proclaimed it a psychedelic picnic. By spring 1967, not one but two Hollywood movies were already being made in and about the Haight. One starred Susan Strasberg and Jack Nicholson. And so the national media, the national TV news, national magazine, and Hollywood, they are what made Haight-Ashbury into a national story. How did this happen? The 800 or so people who settled in the Haight, the original hippies, were rebels against what they perceived as a soulless, plastic American culture. They were hugely innovative culturally, and they did it all in just 100 weeks, really, from fall 65 to fall 67. Amazing period. LSD led them to elevate the natural over the artificial. Natural foods, whole grain bread, natural clothing, wool and cotton, blue jeans, housing that was jumbled and colorful, as opposed to stark and organized Swedish modern. By summer '66, these innovators were everywhere in the Haight, and not just the psychedelic rock bands giving free concerts in the Panhandle. Fred Rowe created the modern organic natural food store. Bill Ham, the guru of the pulsating light show. I have this list, it's all in your terms and concept, these people. Nancy Hamren, the repopularizer of yogurt. Jane Lapiner, who reinvented artisanal whole grain bread. Judy Goldhalf and Jody Robinson's inventor of tie-dye. Jay and Ron Thelen, the inventors of the head shop. Bonnie McLean and Wes Wilson, the inventors of psychedelic poster art. Bill Graham and Chet Helms, dance concerts. And soon came the first underground psychedelic newspaper, not a political newspaper, a really weird psychedelic newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, published by Alan Cohen and Wilder in every issue. If you get a copy of it, it's really hard to follow what the hell is going on in it. And then there was, of course, Owsley Stanley, a pioneering private manufacturer of LSD. He began distributing his first powerful capsules in April 1965, really early. He eventually distributed 2 million hits. And he controlled the market because his was the best, his was the purest, the safest, in a huge amounts, and cheap. Owsley kept the price artificially low, $2 a hit, in order to sell more, sort of the Henry Ford of psychedelics. Market control brought in lots of cash via low prices but high volume. But Owsley mainly kept the prices low not to make a lot of money, but because he believed that the more LSD he sold, the better for the world. I actually live around the corner from Owsley's Berkeley house, and it's a weird house, I'll just say that. Owsley was also the early financial backer of the Grateful Dead. And not only that, but Owsley for 2 years was their sound technician. He had many talents. He made a personal point of trying to get his LSD to all the musicians that he could. Owsley's intense figure was a frequent sight backstage at the Avalon and the Fillmore, where he was greeted with awe. A few months before, half the storefronts on Haight Street had been vacant. But by fall 1966, there were clothing stores, a coffee house, a health food store, a hippie ice cream store, the psychedelic shop, and lots of small jewelers and other craftspeople. Haight's sidewalks became decorated with psychedelic designs in colored chalk. In January, the organization Haight Independent Proprietors, HIP, urged Tom Cahill, the tough SF chief of police, to ease up on police sweeps of the neighborhood, telling Cahill that 26 new commercial establishments had arisen in the Haight just in the last 6 months. This was great finances for the city. And they also said that LSD had made them all better people. Cahill was not impressed with either argument. In autumn 66, the Diggers first appeared. They were communist breakaway members of the old San Francisco mime troupe for whom the mime troupe wasn't radical enough. Other than contributing aggressively to the general anarchy, they saw their main task as distributing free food to the young people who were now flooding into the Haight without any resources. Owsley made sure the Diggers got plenty of LSD for free. The suddenly appearing institutions of Haight-Ashbury counterculture owed a great deal to these individual hippie entrepreneurs. They were entrepreneurs, but they weren't mostly interested in high profits, and they actually tried not to compete against each other. But the overall result of their efforts was that acquiring certain products soon became a political act. A fringed buckskin jacket, moccasin boots, blue jeans, a VW van in my case. Okay, so that's the kind of general revolution, but I want to point out that it's a commercial revolution, and the commercial revolution is based on the free amount of money that the baby boomers had available to themselves to spend. Okay, now origins of the actual festival. Monterey Pop, the film, it presents what utopia might feel like, rather than how it was organized. But the hard fact is, it was organized. And the only reason the Monterey Pops Festival took place at all was because of a large TV movie contract. The contract, which is our movie, money makes the world go round. The idea for the festival starts in Los Angeles with John and Michelle Phillips of the music group The Mamas and Papas. There was going to be a jazz festival, and it was going to be pretty crappy, but they thought that they could take it over. Though not a rock and roll band, the Mamas and Papas' lyrics and harmonies, for instance in the huge hit California Dreamin', reflected the growing counterculture. The photos on the cover of their second album made them look like hippies, which is what they became, via both marijuana and LSD. In April 67, John Phillips and Lou Adler, the Mamas and Papas manager, along with Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, came up with the idea of staging a 3-day rock festival at Monterey Fairgrounds near San Francisco, focusing on what Phillips called the new cultural moment, which was then only a year old. Artists would perform for free, with profits going to charity. It would be the first charity rock concert ever held. Again, another visionary concept, never been done before. The original investment of $40,000 came from Adler, John and Michelle Phillips, Paul Simon, and record executive Terry Melcher. Melcher was the son of singer-actress Doris Day. He'd been the producer of the Byrds' breakthrough rock and roll cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. He loved the new music. He became the music director at Monterey, and Melcher was brilliant at it. Of course, 2 years after Monterey, Melcher's home would be the target of the Manson family because Melcher turned down Charles Manson for a recording contract, leading to the murder of Sharon Tate and her friends. The organizers scheduled the festival for June 16th through 18th, 1967. They only began organizing it in April. They put the show together in 6 weeks. John and Michelle Phillips contacted the artists, who were their friends, Paul McCartney of the Beatles and Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, both of them now psychedelic gurus, added great weight. Great LA groups signed on to play for free. Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds. The festival had good luck all the way through. For instance, it's very important that Optimistic Festival, they had really great luck. The only reason they invented Jimi Hendrix from London was because Paul McCartney insisted that this guy was great. Otherwise, they'd never heard of him before. The other organizers had no idea of what Jimi Hendrix could or would do. But though the festival was held in Northern California and was a celebration of the new hippie culture centered in San Francisco, the San Francisco groups themselves were reluctant to join. They saw themselves as a great and pure countercultural force. The bands held back because of suspicions that the festival project was a capitalist trick by Adler and Phillips. They were pushed in this direction by the Diggers, our communist idealists who gave out free food and the hate, and opposed the corruption of the movement that they could see was coming. It didn't help that John Phillips had just produced Scott McKenzie's hit San Francisco Flowers in Your Hair, a horrible song perceived by the real Haight-Ashbury hippies as an exploitation of their culture. The Grateful Dead saw John Phillips as, quote, just another LA slicko, here to exploit our love phenomenon. 2 figures saved the festival. They were from the new San Francisco culture, and they convinced the psychedelic bands of the sincerity of the project. One was Ralph Gleason, the music critic of our San Francisco Chronicle. He'd become a champion of psychedelic rock, the groups who played it, and the lifestyle they lived. It was he who pointed to Plato's remark that when the music changes, the walls of the city shake. He had great credibility with the band. The other figure was Tom Donahue, a 6'4", 400-pound giant. He'd created the revolutionary KMPX underground rock station just a month earlier in April. Think of these changes: the huge human being in January, the first FM underground rock station in April, the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic in early June, the Haight-Ashbury Free Clothing Store. Take what you want. It's free. You're free. In early June, the first 3-day free rock festival in the world. Such innovation. As Donahue said a month before Monterey, there are only 2 constants in the San Francisco scene: music, grass, and LSD. Yes, I know that's actually 3 constants. That's what the Cultural Revolution was. As another hippie declared, we'd rather be wise and sensitive than clear. And so Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, Moby Grape, Quicksilver, and the other bands finally signed on. but lots of money was still needed to make the festival happen. None of the bands was paid, but it took money to provide for first-class transportation, housing, and food for the bands and their large entourages, which amounted to hundreds of people, money to pay upfront guarantees to the festival grounds owners and other insurance, money to rent porta potties for thousands of people, money to pay for the huge new Fender amplifiers that revolutionized the sound of the music. The Grateful Dead stole those amplifiers the night after the end of the festival and took them back to San Francisco. Well, they didn't believe in private property. The organizers sold 12,000 tickets at $3 a ticket, but that didn't cover much. And in any case, when another 30,000 people showed up, they just let in everybody for free, setting another precedent, namely Woodstock. But the key to the financing came from a $400,000 contract from ABC TV to Don Pennebaker to make a documentary of the festival. What was proposed was a 1-hour TV special in August. It was ABC's idea to capture the younger audience. Well, they didn't have Star Trek. The festival organizers provided the bands with the best of everything: first-class sound equipment, the best eating and sleeping arrangements, first-class transportation. A brilliant team of engineers created a fabulous PA system. Everything just worked out great. The Diggers, though, had warned that the LA Slickers would somehow make money out of Monterey Pop. They were wrong, sort of, about that. All profits from the festival itself went to the Monterey Pop's Foundation, which still exists. But when ABC executives saw the film Don Pennebaker had made, they dropped the project in horror because it was such a big propaganda for acid, and gave the film rights instead to the festival producers for free, despite the $400,000 investment, which they just wrote off. And so the festival organizers were able to make money from Pennebaker's film, our film, when it went into theatrical release in 1968. It had a ready-made audience and made really good money. Now, the bands had performed for free at Monterey Live, but they did each eventually get $5,000 for appearing in the film. So I'm coming towards the end. But behind the scenes at Monterey, lucrative recording contracts were being signed by the bands. Record company executives were integrating the San Francisco sound into the corporate machine. In many ways, Monterey Pop was an audition, and agents from the record companies sat in the front row. The Diggers' warning of corruption was actually correct. As one executive said, "Why should music be free? That idea originated from some brainless hippie. It's over." Nevertheless, in hippie terms, the festival was a success. Maybe 60,000 people in one way or another attended, almost 3 times the number of the human being in January. It was huge, exhilarating, and peaceful. Monterey Police Chief Frank Marinello announced on the 3rd day that he'd already sent his security forces home. "I feel the hippies are my friends," he announced, and added that he wanted to visit Haight-Ashbury. Now, the Diggers, being the Diggers, organized an immediate counter-festival to Monterey. One of the rituals of Haight-Ashbury was the celebration of the natural planetary events of the year. Just 4 days after the Monterey Pops Festival, the Diggers held a day-long celebration of the summer solstice, that is June 21st, 1967, just 4 days after the ending of the festival. It was in Golden Gate Park. It featured much of the same bands that had performed at Monterey. Thousands of young people attended, and it was, of course, free, a non-commercial thing. Unfortunately, nobody made recordings of what was performed. That's too bad. As to the profits of the recording companies, none of the San Francisco bands knew how to do top-flight recording, and the companies charged them 30% of the band's cut in the contract just to record their playing for the companies to sell. Let me repeat that. That's in addition to the 50% the company take off the sales of the records. That left 50% for the bands, but the companies took another 30% for their help in technical engineering. But the musicians didn't care that much because being local celebrities in San Francisco suddenly wasn't enough. So, yes, the record company focused on the money in the San Francisco sound. And yet, the music was so powerful that the attention brought to it by the record companies and by establishment publications such as Newsweek, that attention only increased its attraction and the attraction of the lifestyle that went with it, redoubling its subversive effect. Lenin is supposed to have said, when it comes time to hang the capitalists, they'll sell us the rope. This is an example. The majority of new musicians were not actually political revolutionaries. Jefferson Airplane sort of was. But the music itself posed a threat to the social order in precisely the manner described by Plato, and for the same reasons. The thundering sound, the beautiful melodies, the appeal of a new way of living, all this attracted and affected the consciousness of millions of people, millions. At a crucial cultural juncture, music as such became a way of opening the doors of perception. That summer, George Harrison of the Beatles and his wife, Pattie Boyd, famously visited Haight-Ashbury, giving their seal of approval and wearing heart-shaped sunglasses. All you need is love. I do have one end comment. The counterculture, of course, eventually failed. The Beatles, John Lennon later said about the 60s, everybody dressed up, but nothing changed. The desire for a transcendent hippie order, glimpsed briefly at the Be-In in January and then at Monterey in June, went unfulfilled. By summer 1968, Haight-Ashbury was a devastated scene of heroin and meth addiction. And some cynics dismissed the entire counterculture itself as just another middle-class adventure in consumerism. Buckskin jackets and VW bands. As the Diggers warned, whose trip are you paying for? How long will you tolerate people transferring your trip into cash? Your style is being sold back to you. New style, same shuck. There's some truth here. The Yippie founder, Stu Albert, once said he didn't want the function of the counterculture to merely be the creation of a hipper life for rich kids. But looking back, Stu Albert also asserted this is not what happened. It was real, and the Cultural Revolution was real. And you can see that also in the primarily conservative population of Monterey, where anything connected to Monterey Pop is still seen by many people as a cultural threat. In 2001, the Monterey History Museum opened an exhibit commemorating the festival. Many volunteer museum docents were furious. Many were retired military or longtime locals, and they were taken aback by such a celebration. There was protests, and many docents quit. Well, it's not really surprising that the counterculture's existence didn't eliminate most of the darkness in the world. Neither did Christianity or the Enlightenment. But if the counterculture in Haight-Ashbury in good part failed, it did broaden the idea of what it meant to be a human being, and the music helped. Okay, let's take a 5 or 6 minute break, and I'll take a look at chat and see what people are saying.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. See you in 5.
Yeah, see you in 5. There weren't any questions, so I'm going to start with Mark Gordon. Before we began, Mark was saying, as someone who was a new leftist in the 60s, that he thought it had been a great mistake for the new leftists to kind of look down on the counterculture as kind of useless dreamers. Could you talk a bit more about why the United Front failed, Mark?
Well, I mean, I was in New York, so it really clearly was a different sense in San Francisco. I had been in San Francisco in 1961. I hitchhiked to California with a friend, and I loved San Francisco. I felt really good. We lived in the Y on Golden Gate Avenue, and we ate in Chinatown. There was a place called the Great Eastern Bakery where you could get a really, really good piece of strawberry shortcake. Anyway, uh, there was something about San Francisco even then that felt liberatory, and I don't know exactly what that was.
Mm.
Um, but and there were a number of people. So I was in Brooklyn College in the City University as undergrad, and there were about five other undergrads from Brooklyn College who had come to San Francisco and were renting a house in Nob Hill, and
Mm.
and we went to see them. We hung out with them a little bit and everything. So there was this kind of something. And of course, the beats, we'd read, and the San Francisco element there was tremendous. So the, but in New York, the focus was on the anti-war and civil rights aspects of things, and increasingly the women's movement. The women's critique in the left was very strong in the 60s, um, and it became really an important element of our thinking. The thing that was really interesting, though, was that my feeling was that all that counterculture stuff was just a distraction to keep us away from getting the real stuff that we really wanted, which was a reorganization of society, a more egalitarian, anti-war, get that thing out of there, and the conflict between the Johnson policies that advanced civil rights and the war were horrendous, and we were, like organizing like mad. So union organizing. I lived near Columbia University, and there was a 1199 organizing drive of the workers that worked in that medical school and the university and the hospital rather. So I feel like it was a golden opportunity. That one of the things that you've done, Art, is to make me realize that the counterculture with all the drugs and everything like that, which we sort of didn't think was so good, um, we wanted people to be very conscious, not to be alert, to be realistic and all that. Um, that it was a missed opportunity because basically all of that was a rejection of the predominant cultural values that um, were, that we were struggling with. I thought that was a really wonderful piece that you've added for my to. Now I have to go back and rethink about the whole thing, all the different folks that I knew, um,
Mm.
like it wasn't like we didn't know people who were really deeply involved in the counterculture. They were there, but they were not. We didn't have. There was like a difference, like a split in the goals in a way. Um, so we could be friends, but we couldn't make the kind of mass movement. And we had some huge mass movements. I mean, don't misunderstand. There were huge million people marches in New York. Um, but yeah, that was, I thought, a very, very valuable insight. So I'm grateful to you for that, Art.
Oh, that's thank you. I've got a couple of comments about the women's movement. The women's movement, the modern second wave feminist movement, began as a real political movement in SDS, Students for a Democratic Society.
Right,
And it
right.
began, we know the exact month and day that it began, which was in September 1967 at the National Quarterly SDS meeting, where women in the SDS movement wanted to talk about how women were treated in the New Left at that point. And the person running the conference, this was the last day, it was the last moment, and he said, "I'm sorry, there's no time for that."
Mm-hmm.
And it's after that that the people involved in it, like Casey Hayden, began creating the first women's consciousness raising circles that began first in Chicago and then spread around the country. 50 years later, Judy and I went to the 50th anniversary celebration of the takeover of Columbia. And there was a big all-day conference uh, organized by the son of a Weather Underground leader, Jeff Jones's son, Ty. And after lunch, somebody in one of the females in the audience said, "You haven't talked about women and in the uprising in 1968." And a gruff male voice said, "There were no women at Columbia in 1968," which is true. They were at Barnard, but they'd come across to join in the seizing the building. And the outrage from that, and we're talking 2018, this happened in 2018, the outrage from that forced Ty Jones to create an ad hoc women's panel to go on to the public arena to talk about women's experiences at Columbia in '68. Without that protest, it would not have happened. So the constant kind of ignoring of women that produced second wave feminism starting in '67 was still going on in 2018. So that is my comment about that. The other thing I would say is, again, I'm biased because I was a countercultural person, but it seemed to me that people in the New Left were they had the right ideas, they had the right goals, but they were very focused on purity, on ideological purity. And that meant inevitably a limited activist group, while the counterculture said, "Do what you want. You can partake as much as you want. You don't have to come in all the way. You can come in part of the way, come in just a little of the way. That's okay." My wife, who was also one of the founders of the Yippies, she said the slogan of the Yippies was, "We're not leaders, we're cheerleaders." That is, do what you would like, and we'll cheer for you if you do it. And it was because of that looseness, which of course from the New Left position made it useless or potentially useless in terms of politics. That looseness. I don't know about you, but I was sure told by my New Left friends that LSD was a CIA plot to destroy the leftist movement. I don't know whether you ever heard that, Mark, but I sure heard that a lot. That
Well,
this,
there was a lot of one of the things that was also happening in addition to the women's movement was the gay rights movement that
yeah,
was emerging in New York, particularly. I don't know in San Francisco how it was.
uh,
And my friends who were gay and in that thing had access or to the counterculture side of things that was very helpful in a way when I think about it. I have to review my whole thing. I mean, this has really been very helpful. So
Okay, Art.
anyway,
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Art. We could listen to you all afternoon, all day. But we have a question from the chat from Lou and Joe, and I wanted to make sure that everybody gets a chance
I
to
didn't.
ask the question. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I see that. Why did Pennebaker feature Ravi Shankar for so long at the end? I don't know. I thought it went on way too long. Also, I saw the emphasis on camera work on the crowd and its faces and clothing more than on the music, except for Ravi. Maybe you said the film was about the music because, as you see, the music comes first, then the culture is created by Lou. There certainly was a lot of fashion photography going on in the movie. I think that's true. Um, I thought the music was great. I mean, this is just subjectively for me. I just accepted the clothing. I didn't really think about it as something that was uh, unique because, after all, I had my own buckskin jacket. I didn't. This didn't uh, impress me. But I think for other people, maybe it was the fashions that really did impress people. Um, I thought that actually the music was great. I have to say one of my cherished memories is watching Marty Ballin at the beginning of Today. He is so stoned he doesn't realize that the song has already begun, and he's just there at the keyboard, kind of spaced out. And then about two verses in, he goes, "Oh, okay." And I mean, I think drugs could be bad. There were lots of casualties in of using those drugs. Uh,
So Art, I have a question.
yeah,
I also, like Lou and Joan, noticed that the Ravi Shankar portion was extremely long, and I wonder what led to the invitation of Ravi Shankar to play, and wasn't he also considered to be counterculture, even though it was from a different sort of musical tradition?
yeah. Um, he is an example of the idolization of India that was going on, led by the Beatles with
Hmm.
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And they were already there in India, spending months at a time with him. And it was felt, as with American Indian culture, that Hindu Indian culture possessed a multifaceted connection to the earth, to the universe, in a way that monotheism did not. And that Ravi Shankar represented that spiritual connection. He was also the only person who was paid. So that's an irony, I think, about that. Well, here's some Hindu spiritualism. Well, you got for it. Nobody else was paid. So, but I think this had to do with a search, a general cultural search that was going on uh, for a kind of cultural sophistication that was separate from Swedish modern, that was separate from technology, that was separate, although they used technology, obviously, that was separate from plastic America, and that Hindu India was a huge attraction to people. People found that a huge attraction. Uh, I mean, the buildings look like psychedelic visions. The temples themselves, I mean, as opposed to the kind of classical architecture, New England spires or whatever, those Hindu buildings are just fabulous from uh, an aesthetic point of view that uh, many people latched onto. But I think it was looking for authenticity. It was looking for, and that's how it worked with American Indian culture also, looking for authenticity. It's why actually authenticity, there's a lot of 19th century stuff going on. Why a buckskin jacket? Oh, mountain men, that these are independent entrepreneurs, when the fact is the mountain men were all employees of the American Fur Company. It's John Jacob Astor. Uh, the, but it was a romanticism that had to do with a feeling that modern plastic America was not soul satisfying. And of course, Ravi Shankar, um, I guess, benefited from it. But he played for a long time. He certainly gave his money's worth to the crowd, and it even moved Jimi Hendrix, that's the last scene of Hendrix is he's entranced by what Ravi Shankar is doing, which was enormously complex to do. That music is enormously complex to play. So I think that was involved in it. But it was a desperate search for something else. I think so. That was certainly going on. I think among the beats it was Europe, but for counterculture people, it was Native Americans and Hindu India, especially. And it had to do with aesthetics, the attraction of the aesthetics.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay. Um,
I was going to say there's someone in this, I believe she's still on. Jerry actually attended the concert,
yes.
and I hope you don't mind, Jerry, if you can tell us a little bit about your experience. Are you
Please
there?
do. Please do.
She might not be.
I don't know. It just switched on me.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This,
My
yeah, it sounds very echoey.
yeah.
Uh,
I don't know.
Well, that's perfect, Jerry.
It's very psychedelic, man.
I was just gonna say, I think if you can hear me, Ravi Shankar.
Wow, it's really hard to hear. Do you have
I think
your phone on as well as a laptop on recording?
Somehow I am connected to Zoom in two places.
Oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I can't get out of it. Sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry.
Hey, that's better.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think that for me, Ravi Shankar playing kind of soothed the waters because I was there because we followed all the San Francisco bands. That's who we followed. It was fun and wonderful. And when the Who came on and started breaking their guitars, and Jimi Hendrix was burning up his, that was nothing we'd ever seen before. And it was really jarring. And then when Ravi Shankar played, that was more like what we liked.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Had a wonderful time. And we were also at the Human Being. And yeah, it brought back a lot of memories. I think it was more tune in, not so political as getting back to the earth and, all that. So
that stuff was good. That stuff was good. I think it's in a way it's in the end it's subversive. Culture is upstream from politics, so culture has to come first. But you were not alone in being shocked at both the Who and Jimi Hendrix. The bass player for the Byrds was shocked. And he said, "That's that's awful. That's awful thing to do to a guitar." Awful.
Yeah.
And Grace Slick, who I thought would have been the toughest person, she was shocked. She said, "That's outrageous to do." So you can see that maybe in thinking about the construction of the movie, that also ending with Ravi Shankar was a kind of soothing way to go out with, and had that message too. That's very interesting. I like that a lot.
What is the significance of breaking your guitar in terms of counterculture? I can kind of see it, but maybe you can phrase it for me.
creative destruction.
I guess.
Yeah, it's something like that.
So you're basically destroying the instruments that you're used to making counterculture.
Yes, that's right. And starting over, getting new ones. Of course, the assumption is that the uh, economy you can get it and pay for it. There's a comment from Shelley it says, I'm a filmmaker and I thought the film was a mess, but I thought Pennebaker put on Ravi Shankar in order to give an ending instead of having it dribble off. Also, there were plenty of views of the audience in and out of the seating area. You saw them long before Shankar. Then it focused on him for about 10 minutes, with occasional shots of the audience getting in, nodding, and grooving. And it showed the virtuosity of him on the sitar. There's an incredibly difficult instrument to play, as opposed to smashing your guitar. Oh, so you think there was a message there, an anti-smashing message?
No, no, I would not. Sorry.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Oops, I have to. No, I didn't think that it was anti-smashing. It's just that that is something that happened in the film, and then this was not what it ended with. And I thought that was interesting, and I thought that, yeah, as several people have said, it ended it and it smoothed things out and so forth.
Could I remark on that?
Just ask Shelley, what would you think of the film if it had ended with Jimi Hendrix smashing the guitar and burning it?
It would have been a very different message.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
could I remark too that the audience had a applause that was almost as long as the concert, as the performance. So he must have hit a chord that outlasted the length of the piece.
Yes,
because we thought it was too long, but the audience applauded longer than I've ever heard an audience applaud.
That's right. And also you could see that they were entranced, and it was as though when it was beginning, he did not show Ravi Shankar until rather late. But you saw people wandering in and out and so forth. Then I think it showed the audience a bit, and then him, and then occasional shots of the audience, and they slowly are getting into almost a trance, which could only happen with its being so long. And also, I mean, it was so interesting to see them going like this and so forth. So, really getting into the groove, a completely different groove. And so I think there also was, as you were saying, a message of, well, you didn't say universality, but the point is that this is more than just a local thing and that kind of thing.
Yes, I think it was saying it's universal. Universal. That vibe was universal. I think, Richard, I think you wanted to say something. You got to unmute.
There.
Okay.
I'm just kind of thinking about the contrast when you talk about the audience participatory reaction to the performers, how different it was with a bunch of screaming females to the Beatles. Kind of a vastly different societal response. And when we were thinking about the females that were reacting to the Beatles, that put me in mind of the same kind of reaction that Elvis had and that Sinatra had. And along the way, there seems to be tapping into a young female, almost hysterical reaction to performers that we didn't see in this most recent movie.
Which?
I'm not sure if that's significant of anything.
Which movie?
The Monterey Pop.
Monterey Pop.
It's interesting.
It's interesting. I certainly remember going with girls to the dance concerts. And I don't think people were screaming, but they were trancing out. There was a lot of trancing out that was going on, with certainly lots of body movement that was going on. Although, as is usual with these stories, some of my old friends, old girl friends, remember going to concerts with me that I don't remember. So I think that,
Is something.
yeah, that's. But I do think that it was the smoothing out, the trancing out, but also the message of universality, because there were all these American bands, and even really the Who are very heavily American influence. And then comes something completely from a different culture, which nevertheless has a very similar message that's being said, and that even tames Jimi Hendrix, and so that he's tranced out as well. So I think that universality was certainly part of it. I think it, Shelley, was a desperate search for something other than plastic America also. And
I'm sure that was true. And also, it was the time when the Beatles and this, that, and the other were very
Yeah.
in tune with all of
Yeah.
this. So,
and that has to do, the cultural influence of the Beatles latching themselves onto Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Suddenly everybody's going to India. And that's a new kind of cultural power. It's one thing to go see Buddy Holly and the Crickets. It's another thing to go to India and actually have Hindu mysticism and Buddhist mysticism, and accept it.
Uh, just a quick question, Shelley. There was a question in the chat for Jerry. Did you remember seeing yourself in the film, or did you recognize, if I can answer that question, you recognize, other than the performers, people that were in the film? No, you can unmute yourself.
I just noticed that he managed to focus on all the pretty girls, and he missed me and my girlfriend. Whoops.
Okay, Shelley, go. You were
I
gonna.
was just going to say that another reason that as a filmmaker and someone doing it for ABC or whatever might want to do that is because if he had ended with any of the other bands,
Yeah.
then it would have made them be the climax and the most important. And I think that he would be in trouble if he did that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that the film was originally made for ABC, and it was going to have to pass ABC executives, and in the end, they rejected it anyway. But if they had ended on that kind of burning revolution moment, it never, that would have been very bad for the producers, and so they didn't do it. And so they ended with an authentic kind of smoothing out kind of thing. I think that's absolutely what they did. And the smoothing out also has to do with the multiplicity of ways of looking at things. So that was also involved. I really thought when Gleason said there are two constants in counterculture: music, marijuana, and LSD. That's just great. That's just perfect. Of the different ways of looking at stuff. But I think the main thing I would say about, I still feel myself that it was that cultural movement was and remains very successful. It's under attack now by Trump. 60 years later, he's still going after him, and that shows its power. But part of the power had to do with its liberatory nature, and also that saying, do what you want, go as far as you want. and you don't have to go all the way in. A lot of people doing the V sign. I mean, all of that stuff were people who were not necessarily acid heads. You know, it's a much broader constituency that the counterculture was able to create. Um, I do want to ask, do people think it was just another middle class adventure in consumerism? I'm not making that up. There's an entire book about that says that. It's very negative and cynical. What do you think? I mean, I bought the jeans, I bought
Mm.
the van. Uh,
Well,
to,
Art, I'll give you my answer. I think that the people who participated in it were certainly not commercial. They were in it for the thrill and the
yeah.
wonderful time that they had. I do think that we all try to make a buck, and that in the wake of that, a lot of people have been able to take advantage of it. Yeah, I just went out and bought another pair of jeans yesterday.
Well, there you go. I mean that, and I mean part of it was the capitalists didn't care what you buy as long as you buy something.
Mhm.
So that was, but on the other hand, it was capitalist enterprises that nationalized this movement in Haight-Ashbury and made it a national cultural movement.
Well, I think the Chronicle
Yeah,
made up the name hippie, and there were tour buses going through the Haight-Ashbury.
sure.
It just felt, we used to call people plastic hippies, and you
Yeah.
know, it got pretty, and I seem to remember, you know, the festival was fun, but the movie stuff, I don't know, didn't seem exactly right.
Well, the movie experience is passive. You go and watch the movie. You're not participating in the way that uh, we did. I think that's fair to say. But on the other hand, a mass phenomenon means you have to make compromises.
Mhm.
And there were maybe there were plastic hippies. I mean, I guess that's there were certainly people in the tour buses were absolutely straight. They were taking a tour to a foreign country. I mean that was. But I think most of the people I knew were sincere. They might have been wrong-headed, especially people who took too much dope were wrong-headed, but they were certainly sincere.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say the core people,
Yeah.
but like the people on the tour buses and the, you know, that's,
And somebody was making money off of that.
Mm.
Tour buses existed for people to pay money to go to Haight-Ashbury. Yeah.
I think there's um, appeal at several levels on the movement that involve sexual liberation
Yeah.
and how exciting that was for a lot of people. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the sexual revolution came and went, and I never fired a shot. Uh,
Um, one of the technological advances was birth control. Birth control pills.
yeah.
And I had a revolutionary moment when, in sometime in summer of '67, I went with a
Three of
girlfriend,
those.
not a
What?
girlfriend,
I
a
think I have three of
girlfriend,
those.
for her to pick up her birth control pills. Oh, I guess it was a Kaiser. It was something like that. That was a revolutionary kind of aspect of it too. Although, you know, it also put pressure on women to say yes. There was a lot of that kind of stuff going on as well. Although my own experience, I'll just say my own experience with this was because so many people said yes. If somebody said no, I didn't think they were fooling or asking, "Do you really mean it?" I thought they well, okay, no. you know, and that made life simpler. You didn't have to psych out what was going on. At least that was my experience. Okay, folks, I guess we're at an end. Next week is the Easy Rider, and you have the terms and concepts for that. And I also want to say, one of the people who made my connection to Santa Cruz was Con Hallinan, Ringo Hallinan, who was a great friend of mine and taught at Santa Cruz for 20 years. And he just died a while ago. And I just want to say I remember him. He comes in, especially with Berkeley in the 60s. He was a real new leftist. He was an out and out communist. So yeah, we can talk more about that in a couple of weeks. Okay, folks, thanks a lot. This was fun.
Thank you, Art. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.